When you study the home front during the Second World War long enough, you start realizing that winter was often as lethal as any weapon on the battlefield. Civilians in Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, the Balkans and parts of Germany weren't just fighting hunger or bombings, they were battling months of crippling cold with almost no fuel, rationed food, failing infrastructure and supply chains stretched to breaking. For the first minute here, let's be honest about what that means. These families weren't survivalists by choice. They were ordinary people pushed into extraordinary circumstances, forced to reverse engineer warmth, food and endurance from whatever scraps the war left behind. No modern gear, no emergency kits, no insulated clothing tech, just intellect, ingenuity, and a refusal to die. And if you're a historian or a prepper who studies real resilience, these winter survival methods give you some of the most valuable lessons you'll find anywhere, because they were forged under pressure few of us will ever experience. With that in mind, let's go straight into the methods that kept families alive when winter turned into another front line. Families relied on layered heat zones to keep limited warmth from escaping. In many wartime apartments and farmhouses, heating an entire home became impossible once coal and wood ran out. Families responded by turning one or two rooms into heat zones, sealing door gaps with cloth, piling rugs against walls and covering windows with oiled paper or extra blankets to reduce drafts. The historical value here is that they treated heat as something to trap, not generate. Today, this translates into creating a microclimate when power goes out. You can apply this by identifying a single room, sealing cracks with towels, taping plastic over windows, and moving bedding into that zone. Heat conservation is often more efficient than heat production, and WWII families mastered that under unimaginable strain. People learned to cook with minimal fuel by using retained heat and slow cooking methods. Fuel shortages forced families to minimize fire usage. One popular technique was using haybox cookers or improvised insulated baskets. A pot of stew was brought to a boil briefly, then placed inside a box stuffed with hay, blankets or clothing where it continued cooking slowly for hours. This saved fuel and prevented smoke detection in occupied areas. For modern preppers, this method is a reminder that heat retention cooking is one of the most fuel-efficient techniques available. You can replicate it by using a modern cooler, heavy blankets, or even a pile of clothes to insulate a pot after heating. It's a strong strategy for emergencies when fuel is limited or must be concealed. Communities survived by preserving calories through fermentation and salt curing when refrigeration failed. During wartime winters, power shortages and destroyed infrastructure made fresh food rare and refrigeration unreliable. Families turned to fermentation, pickling, salt curing and cellaring, methods used for centuries but brought back to necessity during the war. Sauerkraut, fermented beets, salted pork, smoked fish and root vegetables stored in underground cellars helped families survive into early spring. The lesson here is that preservation isn't a hobby, it's a lifeline. You can apply this today by learning fermentation basics, practicing small-scale curing, or building a simple passive cold storage system, such as a buried container or insulated pantry area. People adapted clothing by repurposing old fabrics into insulation layers. Winter clothing ran out fast, especially during population displacement. Families tore apart old coats, blankets, curtains, and even bedding to sew internal linings into their clothing. Stuffed fabrics, layered wraps, and multi-layer socks made from scraps were common. The historical lesson is that insulation can be engineered, not just bought. If you were facing a winter with limited gear, you could enhance insulation by adding layers inside clothing, stitching additional padding between fabric layers, or stuffing material into pockets and collars to reduce heat loss. Survivors rationed calories strategically instead of eating whatever was available. Wartime families learned that you don't eat the same way in summer as you do during winter scarcity. They slowed metabolism by reducing physical exertion, saving carbohydrate-rich foods like potatoes and grains for energy-demanding days, and eating more fat-rich foods when available because fat burns slower and produces more heat. The actionable lesson is understanding how to plan calories seasonally. Modern preppers can apply this by storing high-fat, shelf-stable foods like lard, tallow, peanut butter and nuts for winter crises, and structuring ration plans around activity levels. People used heated stones, bricks and bottles as portable warmth sources. With firewood scarce, families heated rocks or bricks in small stoves, wrapped them in cloth and used them as bed warmers. Glass bottles filled with hot water served the same purpose. This conserved fuel by heating objects instead of entire rooms. Today, this can still be applied during power outages by heating stones safely on a camp stove, insulating them in thick fabric, and placing them at the foot of your bedding. It's a controlled, sustainable heat source that requires minimal fuel. Families survived by building small winter shelters inside larger rooms. In some of the coldest regions, families built tent-like structures inside bedrooms using sheets, chairs and blankets. The idea was simple: reduce the air volume their body heat needed to warm. These indoor shelters were incredibly effective and often determined whether children survived freezing nights. The modern equivalent is creating a temporary cocoon in emergencies, setting up a small tent indoors, or making a compact sleeping area using blankets draped over furniture to reduce heat loss. People used community networks for warmth, food and safety when individual survival became impossible. The survival records of the war show a consistent pattern. Communities that organized skill sharing, food pooling and shared heating survived better than isolated families. Multiple families gathered in one home, combining heat and resources. Skills like sewing, mending tools, gathering firewood and preparing preserved foods were shared tasks rather than individual burdens. The takeaway for today is clear. In winter crises, cooperation multiplies survival odds. Build networks, share resources and coordinate efforts instead of trying to endure everything alone. These 8 methods are not romanticized survival tales. They're historical evidence of how ordinary people stayed alive when winter became another enemy in a world already at war. If you value real survival wisdom rooted in history, subscribe to The Prepper Historian, share this video with others, and keep these lessons alive for those who may one day need them.